Today we have another episode of The Adventures of Skyler and Nick, written by A Mysterious Lurker. It's a bit of a long story. You might want to start at the beginning. Enjoy. The next time I agreed to do a case with Nick, it was sudden. I bought coffee before getting started for the day. I had accepted a difficult PI job that I wasn't entirely certain how to approach. Nick parked outside the coffee shop, leaning out his car window to wave me down. "Hey, Snickers, what are you doing here?" I asked, not expecting to see him. He was in a suit, so I assumed he could work again. I didn't think he could handle being bored at home for much longer, his hair much longer from when I first met him. Nicky needed a haircut. It really ruined his secret agent look. A job came up. We can cover your day job with human detectives. I am the only agent free for this task and cannot go into the field without a partner. The corporation is very short on agents lately. I wasn't sure how I felt about someone else taking a job I'd taken, but it did answer my issue of finishing a difficult case I shouldn't have accepted in the first place. The corporation really needed to hire more agents or take fewer cases. Nick and I weren't a very strong pair. We'd really been very lucky on every case we've done so far. "All right, do I need to call anyone about covering my job?" Nick shook his head, saying it was already taken care of. With that settled, all I needed to do was get into the car. Nick turns out to be a very careful driver. As we went towards our mystery location, a car cut us off, nearly causing an accident. Nick didn't even flinch. I spilled my coffee on my lap and swore. His car looked pristine, and I found some napkins in the glove compartment to clean myself up best I could. My partner wasn't much of a talker, so I just told him a little bit about what had been going on since I'd last seen him. His expression didn't change, but I think he enjoyed listening to what a regular life was like. We finally reached a forest park. Nick parked, but it wasn't our final location. He needed to draw a magic circle that would transport us to where we needed to go. I didn't have any magic powers, and Nicky was weak when it came to magic. He used tools already imbued with power, or as he explained, used power from his surroundings. The nature of the park turned out to be very generous when it came to lending magic for agents to use. The corporation kept the forest clean and well taken care of to repay it. So, leaning on some help from the woods, Nicky could make a difficult spell he normally wouldn't be able to use. It took him a while to write all the symbols around the circle. I just watched, unable to assist. "What kind of language is that?" I asked to pass the time. "It's a common one that creatures of the night use. Nearly every one of them can read and write it. Circle spells can be done in any language, though. If you had access to a magic marker or other objects with power, even you could make a spell. Although you must freehand a perfect circle, and most people get stuck on that," he said as he stepped back to evaluate his process. "So how come you just don't use English? Won't it be easier than this language?" "This language makes the magic flow better. There is less chance of a blowback if you use it. English should only be used for minor spells, nothing complex such as this. Also, the wording in spells is the most important factor. It is possible to think around the wording of a spell and make it invalid. I wonder what a good example of that would be." Nick paused to think as I stared at the circle surrounding his car. I never assumed magic would be so complicated. I mean, it's magic, right? It makes impossible things happen without effort. I've known Nick for a while, and yet I still learn some things. I'd even asked Aberash about magic, but she didn't go into details about it. She must not have wanted to waste the time because I would never be making spells. An example I can think of is an issue with magic tripwires the hunters created. They seemed to set them up so if the wire was tripped or snapped, it would go off. But they forgot to include the word cut in the spell. If someone cut the wire, the spell would not activate. Nick got back to work fixing some symbols he wrote in the dirt. I also hadn't heard much about the hunters. They were very similar to the corporation, but they didn't employ supernatural creatures. They would use magic, and that was it. Their goal was to kill every creature out there. Both companies tolerated each other to get cases solved. If a hunter had have approached me first, I would have had a completely different outlook on supernatural creatures. "So, that other language, does it, word things different?" I asked, and Nick nodded. there is less room for errors if you use this language for spells. I think this spell is complete. Did you sign all the forms? Even the one that gives your family a lump sum if you die on the job? Nick said with his voice still fairly monotone. Nicky, why are you asking that? I said while nervously looking at the spell he had just finished. No reason. I can't believe Nick lied right to my face. I didn't even think he could do such a thing. I suddenly didn't trust what he created, but in the end, I should trust my partner with my life. So what if Nicky wasn't the best at magic? He wouldn't risk our lives if he wasn't confident in his spell work, right? We both got into the car. The moment the doors closed, our surroundings warped. I felt dizzy and lightheaded. When it was over, we were on the start of a different forest trail. Nick let out a held breath I pretended not to hear. Starting the car, we drove down a bumpy road until we reached a fence and a guard station. Nick stopped and waited for a man in a uniform to come out to greet us. Rolling down his window, Nick got out his badge, ready to talk. That's strange. What is a corporation agent doing out here? And who else is in your car? Doesn't look like an agent to me, the guard commented. I wore jeans, a plain shirt, and a light jacket. I really didn't look as official as Nick, so I didn't blame the man. A friend, Nicky said. Temporary partner, I corrected. The friend comment appeared to have just slipped out. I think Nicky didn't have that many friends, just got excited to be able to say it. We've come to check up on the farm. We suspect they've been using automated daily check-ins. They have not responded to our last call. If we do not return through this gate in 24 hours, you must call the direct line asking for backup agents. The guard whistled at Nick's request. He looked beyond the gate and into the sea of trees. It looked to be the most interesting thing he'd ever been asked to do on the job. All right, I got you. But I doubt anything is wrong. I haven't heard or seen anything. I hope this is just a case of neglect and not the alternative, Nick said in a somber voice. I didn't know what was going on, which was pretty normal. Checking my side, I had the terrible realization I didn't have my gun. Nick picked me up from the coffee shop and I don't carry it on me besides cases with him. I would bring it up after. I did live through a few cases without it, so hoped it wasn't a big deal. We were let through the gate, the road extra bumpy and impossible to talk while driving. I needed to wait until we stopped before asking what the case would be. Finally, we reached what looked to be some sort of very small town in the middle of the forest. A spot for a few parked cars out front and one main street. I didn't see any signs of life. As we got closer, I could see why. The cars had open doors and trails of blood leading from them. It was as if someone tried to get away from something and failed. Nick parked and got out of the car, not appearing too nervous despite the sight of blood. What is this place? What happened? I got out to join him and looked over the ruined area. Windows and doors were broken. More blood on the dirt roadway, but no bodies to speak of. Whoever lived here might already be dead by now. Aside from taking care of whatever monster did this, it looked like we arrived too late to help. Sadly, it's what we feared. This place raises a certain type of supernatural creature to be butchered and be used to create magic objects or weapons. It's not often that his words were cut off when something came out of a building and into the light. Smoke poured from the creature as the sunlight burned it. It spotted Nick and headed right for him, screeching. Without a weapon, I couldn't help. Calmly, Nick drew his sword and a familiar sound rung. With one swift movement, he cut the creature in half, the shockwave from his sword traveling down, scarring the road. He replaced his sword into the sheath and, for a moment, looked like a badass agent. I looked at the creature's body, not believing what I was seeing as it smoldered in the sunlight. Are we dealing with vampires? I said in a low voice. No. Why do you ask? I looked between him and the giant bat-like creature burning from the sunlight. I tried explaining, but he didn't understand. All vampire media hadn't reached him, and because there were so few vampires left, he had never faced one. I was positive that bat creature was a bloodsucker from everything I'd seen. Nick got ready to explain. They're known as velvet bats. Through genetic manipulation, they've become this size. They are simply large bat creatures, but they attack in swarms, so it's easy to become overwhelmed. The corporation and the hunters created farms like these to raise them, because they are the creature that gives out the most amount of magic through the harvesting of their body parts, compared to the effort to raise them. I think I've heard at some point supernatural creature body parts are used as magic tools. The magic marker Nick used for his smaller spells may contain some blood of some creature as a power source. I looked over at the carnage that had long since occurred, felt sorry for both the humans that lost their lives and the bats raised to be slaughtered for parts. You mentioned at the gate that they were using automated daily check-ins. Is that why no one knew this place was attacked? I asked, trying to understand how this could have been avoided. As far as we can tell, these farms are built far away to ensure if the bats do get out, it takes them a few days to reach a city or town. The ones running the farms must check in every day so the corporation knows if something like this happens. It's a paid position to keep people motivated not to slack on the task. I fear the one using this farm used an automated system to save money. That bat we saw, they should not be awake at this time, let alone go into the sun. I suspect these bats were modified past the corporation limits to create larger feral creatures that produce more materials when harvested. All of this happened because someone got greedy? I hated to think that was the case, but it appeared to be the most logical assumption. Now that I knew a little bit more about what we were dealing with, Nick told me the next step was to be cleaning out the place of any remaining bats. There was a good chance nearly all of them fled into the forest before sun rose because their food supply ran out. I got told to stay behind and keep watch. Nick doubted there was going to be anyone left alive. He didn't want to put me in danger of a random bat attacking from a building, and he didn't want me to see any of the gory remains of the people who worked at the farm. I felt fine staying behind, but didn't get to tell him I was unarmed. Nick was running off down the main road, hand at the ready in case he needed to draw his sword. For being one of the weaker agents, Nick was pretty impressive. I waited near the car and watched him easily take out any bat that lunged from the dark. There clearly wasn't anyone left to save because he let the orchestra loose on the buildings. I felt the shock waves of each swing from where I was standing. Debris exploded out from where he directed his sword in any direction. These buildings would need to come down to make sure the bats didn't have anywhere to hide. He did a good job of that. A hissing noise made me turn to see a bat crawling on all fours closer to the car. It spotted me and started to hobble closer, drool dripping from its large mouth. Smoke poured from its body where the sun hit it, but the creature didn't appear to care with food right in front of it. Nick? I called out, not taking my eyes off the bat. It got closer, inch by inch. I kept stepping back, hoping that it didn't decide to go faster and bite my face off before Nick swooped in for a rescue. I didn't have any kind of weapon, not even a big stick to try and swat it away. I called out for Nick again, and as the beast launched off the ground, screeching and wings outstretched, I could only shield my face, praying for a miracle to happen. At the last second, a razor-thin blade of wind sliced off the bat's head from its body at a speed almost too fast to see. The body kept flying, and I stumbled over my own feet. I fell to the ground, and the rest of the bats sailed over me to crash a few feet behind. Nick used the shockwave the orchestra could produce to save me at a distance. He came jogging up, looking worried over the close call.
Why didn't you shoot it?
Nick asked as he offered a hand to help me get up. I didn't have my gun when you picked me up, Nicky, I said, accepting the help. An almost startled look came over his face and he tensed up. It looked as if he'd forgotten to turn the stove off.
You're right. I have something for you. I forgot to get it. 1 second.
He hurried over to the car to dig around in the back seat. After finding what he wanted, he came back over with a few items in his hand. One was a belt of pouches with a holster on the side, and the other was a handgun. I didn't know much about guns, but I assumed it to be some sort of 9mm that used magazines. But I could be wrong. They all looked the same to me. The gun was unloaded, and Nick didn't hand it over yet.
We had this made for you. 4 of these pouches have a spell that connects to the gun. It can sense when the gun is empty and can automatically reload it for you. like teleporting the magazine in place. Like this. He brought the unloaded gun near a pouch with a magazine stored inside. A set of identical circle spells glowed on the pouch and the gun. A click echoed, and the magazine suddenly appeared loaded. This would be very useful. But why did only 4 pouches have spells on them? I asked Nick, and he continued explaining. This spell is more complicated than you would expect. It takes a lot of power to recharge, so we were only able to get 4 prepared. But you have 2 regular magazines, 4 automatic reloads, and 2 manual reloads. 3 now, I corrected. Nick paused, staring at me. The fact he wasted an automatic reload on an example sinking in. His eyes darted to the pouch in his hand, fretting over his mistake. I suppose I could have just told you. I could have given him a hard time, but decided against it. An honest mistake. I took the pouch belt. I double-checked the safety and went over the gun a few times, because it was a model I've never handled. Nick held back a magazine so he could take a bullet out to show it off. Aside from it being a dark red, it appeared normal. Another bat was eyeing us from the woods, along with a few more starting to peek through the ruined buildings. I felt tense from their stares, even though I now had a gun at my hip. These bullets are magic infused. I made them while I wasn't working. However, I am not skilled at creating items like this. Some have more power than others. Try shooting these bats as practice. I'll ensure they don't get close. With that encouragement, I pulled the new gun from the holster and stitched into the ammo pouch. Triple checking to make sure the safety was off, I lined up the shot and fired. The first missed. The next shot hit its mark, but a weak bullet. The third hit, and it exploded the bat's head. I jumped and swore at the sight. The other bats scurried back into hiding for the moment. I never expected the bullets to be that strong. Jesus, Nicky, what did you use for these? I asked, still a bit stunned. Some of my blood. Another unexpected answer. I looked at him, trying to picture my partner sitting at home by himself, bleeding to create a weapon. I did not enjoy that mental image in the slightest. How much did you use? How are you still standing? I mean, there are 6 magazines here. I would never thought Nick's blood and body parts could be used the same way as the bats. He wasn't human after all. Abarash told me that Nick didn't have that much magic. For him to create so many bullets, he must have gone through a lot of blood. Only a drop. I do not have a strong internal magic source, but for some reason my blood and other body parts are so high in magic content, it's difficult to control. Even the most powerful creatures in the organization cannot maintain control of the outflow to put it to use. So far, one has died from magic blowback and several were injured. As far as I can tell, I only succeeded making these bullets because I was fusing knowledge of alchemy and magic. Some of the bats got confident while Nick spoke. They skittered from the buildings trying to get close. Some were bigger than myself, while others looked to be about the size of a large dog. The sunlight burned their skin, so either they didn't notice the pain or were very hungry. I fired off more shots, getting slightly better at hitting my targets. Aside from getting some shooting practice in, I was learning a lot about how magic worked. You've mentioned blowback before. Is it really that bad? I asked, keeping an eye out for any surprise attacks from the creatures that were still hiding. Yes, it can be. It happens when someone attempts to use more magic than their body can handle. It's the reason why we cannot heal you in the same way we can heal the supernatural agents. Humans have a low magic tolerance. A healing spell may fry your nerves or kill you. I've heard that before. It was the reason why there was a scar on my face from the twin lizard case. There were some medicines that could have fully healed all my injuries, but the corporation didn't have any on hand at the time. Abarash apologized, saying they didn't hire very many humans, so didn't notice when the supply ran out. It also takes a while to harvest the ingredients, so she was unaware when more could be made. Being a human working for a mostly supernatural-run company sure did have a lot of weird drawbacks. A smoking bat took at least 4 bullets to take down. Each bullet did appear to have different power levels. Some took out a bat in one hit, others needed a few. What would come out of the gun next was completely random. Nicky did say he wasn't all that great at making stuff like this. I just hoped the more powerful bullets would come out at the right time, and that a whole magazine wasn't duds. Even the weaker bullets did damage, but I didn't want to be in a situation where Nick wasn't around and I was facing more than one bat with a weak gun. There really is a big difference in bullet strength, I commented. I'd only killed a few bats, but I had already emptied a magazine. Nick needed to show me how to manually reload a new one. I did not test them out beforehand, although I'd hoped even the weaker ones would be more powerful than this. I'll be sure to adjust the amount I place in each bullet for the next time. There are 2 mixed in I was worried would be too powerful. I believe you already fired one that exploded the first bat you killed. It appears I was too nervous and severely underestimated what I was making. Well, at least we learned something from this. So he can adjust how he makes the bullets and the amount of magic he puts in them for the next job. I was pretty much done practicing and wanted to leave the rest up to Nick. With his sword, he could take out all the bats in the buildings in a short while. Then we would go after whatever bats fled into the forest before leaving for the night. There were an unknown number of them, and he didn't want us to face them alone. We could not face what could be an army of those creatures at night. Coming back in the morning with backup, or even without it, was the plan. Turns out, that wasn't in the cards. One of the bullets Nick was worried about was not fired yet. I'd missed the bat closest to me, located in a ruined building, and the bullet hit something else nearly at the end of the dirt road. That may have been what saved our lives. I couldn't react fast enough. I just saw a flash of white, then nothing besides a ringing in my ears. I wasn't even aware until we both got knocked out and blown back until I woke up, body aching and ears still ringing. It appears their new little toy blew up in their faces. Just goes to show you should always shoot your shot. Even if you miss, you can still land unconscious 50 feet away. Alright, let's move on to part 2 and see if those sleepyheads are awake yet. I sat up with no idea of what just happened. I was even more dumbfounded when I looked to where the ruined building should be, only to find a crater a few feet deep and no remains of the farm we came across. Well, no remains where they should be. The debris of a few buildings scattered in the trees. Some of the trees had been knocked over entirely from the force. How we were still alive was a miracle. Shaking my head, I confirmed what I saw wasn't a dream, and then worry spiked in my gut for my partner. I looked down to see Nick unconscious on his side, his arm still wrapped around my waist. At the last second, he used his body to shield mine from the massive blast that should have killed us both. The entire back of his jacket burned away and his skin red. Another tidbit I learned was that the agent's suits were imbued with magic to protect the wearer from damage, and it would also repair itself. His suit was already starting to reform around the edges. At least Nicky was still breathing. I wanted to know if he was alright, but at the same time I didn't want to move him in case his injuries were beyond what I could see. His eyes started to open, and I told him to stay down. Of course, he didn't listen to me. Sitting up, we both looked over the massive amount of damage from the one little bullet he made. You said there were 2 overcharged bullets, right? I asked. Nick didn't even respond. He just took my magazines to sort through the remaining bullets to find the other bomb he'd created. I stood up to check the car. I could walk thanks to my partner, but we still didn't want to stay the night, even if Nick had recovered by then. I hoped the car was far enough away from the blast to survive the same way we did, but we were not that lucky. I found it wrapped around a tree. All the other cars left behind from the deceased farm workers looked about the same. I went back to Nick, who looked alright considering how injured his back got. Do you want the long or the short answer on the car? I asked him walking over. Short. It's fucked. He stopped checking the bullets to look over at me. He looked more startled by my word choice than by the fact our car was ruined. Normally I had the mouth of a sailor, but since being around Nick, I toned it down. In fact, I don't think he's heard me outright curse so directly before. An odd thing to notice, considering our situation. His good nature must be rubbing off on me. Can you use a spell to get us out of here?
Sadly, no. This place is surrounded by a magic barrier to keep the bats inside in case something like this happens. I am not strong enough to get past it.
Well, that sucks. If we started to walk, then we would not reach the fence before night. Nick wasn't healed yet, so until he got better, walking or fighting was out of the question. At least that one bullet wiped out any creatures along with anything else in the area. He found the other suspect bullet rather quickly and returned the gun in holster. He then checked his phone to see if he could call backup, only to find it dead. Mine as well. That magic blast ruined our phones and the last chance we had for help. The guard would call for backup, but that meant staying in the woods, surrounded by monsters, all night.
I'll hold on to this bullet for now. I do not wish to risk using it. Let's start walking to the...
Nick started to stand up as he spoke. His voice sounded weaker than normal. He only got halfway to his feet before falling forwards. I caught him so his face didn't slam to the ground. For a thin guy, he was heavy. With some effort, I got him back down, his entire body dead weight and head slumped. Take a break, Nicky. We'll get moving when you're better. He did not appear happy over that plan. His body refused to listen to his wishes, and Nick fell asleep in a few seconds, leaving me alone to keep an eye out for any creatures that might decide to make us a snack. As the hours passed, I started to get more and more stressed out. Fear was settling in my shoulders. It would be very bad if Nick wasn't feeling better by the time the sun went down. I was under the impression that somewhere off in the forest lurked a hungry horde just waiting for the dark. How long could I hold out alone with only a gun? The sky started to turn orange, and I was sweating. A hand fell on my shoulder, causing me to jump. I knew it wasn't a bat, but it still startled me. Nick sat up, his suit repaired, and he didn't appear as tired as before.
I am unaware of what took up all my energy.
Considering the size of the blast, I wasn't surprised he got so weak. It was only a surprise we both lived. My heart still beating from him suddenly touching my shoulder. I shifted to face him so we could figure out our next step. It's fine, but now what? Are we going to try and make it to the fence? He paused to think for a moment, trying to see if there would be a faster way other than on foot. I could have started on without him, but I didn't want to leave him alone in the open. I also didn't think I would reach the fence before nightfall, and didn't want to be in the woods alone.
Yes, that is the only option, but I am concerned about you fighting in the dark. It is not a full moon, and shall be hard to see what you're firing at.
That was a good point. Unlike him, I couldn't see in the dark. If a swarm of bats came at us, I might be blind depending on how bright the moon was. I know I keep asking if there's a magic way to solve these things, but is there a spell to give me night vision or something?
There is, but I do not have enough power or a tool to drain magic from to make the spell.
We both looked around hoping to see a body of a bat we could use. They'd been blown away with everything else, and I didn't kill any while Nick slept. I asked if he could just use his blood, but he shook his head. Oddly enough, his blood had too much magic, and he would suffer blowback using it. He could only make bullets because he fused alchemy in the process, but could not do the same to give me night vision. A few minutes passed until I got an idea. Can you, use the magic in that overpowered bullet you made? Now that would work. With the sun setting, Nick drew a circle for me to stand inside. He quickly got the writing finished and needed to be very careful about the amount of power he pulled from the bullet. I did trust him, but still felt nervous when the circle he drew in the dirt glowed. Blinking, I didn't notice anything different. Nick was shaking his hand as if it hurt. He received some damage, but not much. The bullet stored so much magic, he barely made a dent using that one spell. He placed it back into his pocket and turned to face me.
I'm the faster runner. We may have a chance of getting to safety if I carry you.
Seriously? I asked. Well, I suppose that was an idea. Because it's just the two of us, I shouldn't be embarrassed over it. I did get flustered, though. Nick turned around to get on one knee. Awkwardly, I got onto his back. My hands were free, so I could fire if needed. This was part of the mission I would ask Nick to keep out of the final report. The moment I felt secured, he took off in a mad dash, wanting to cover as much ground as possible. The trees flew past as we tried to outrun the setting sun. We wove through bushes while staying out of the way of tree branches. With this rough terrain, it should have given him more issues, but Nick didn't slow down. When the sun set, I found I could see as if the moon was full. It wasn't perfect night vision, but it was much better than nothing. I could hear the bats starting to screech off in the night. I mentally urged Nick to run faster. A dark shape dropped in front of us. Without slowing his pace, Nick drew the orchestra to slice the bat in half. I clung to him, nearly losing my grip as he moved. He might be able to fight and run with someone on his back, but I might be thrown off if too many bats appeared. By the sound of things, that would happen sooner rather than later. As more screeching came from the dark, Nick started to look around to find a spot to make a stand. Bats of different sizes flew between the trees, getting ready to attack. Finally, Nick skidded to a stop, his heels digging into the ground. I stumbled off, my back facing his. I fired, taking down a bat that got too close. "Duck low," Nick told me. I got down to my knees, expecting something to attack us. Instead, Nick spun around on his heel, using the shockwave coming from the orchestra, taking out trees in a large circle surrounding us. My curses were drowned out by the sounds of trees crashing down and bats screeching in displeasure. Soon, they came flooding back, red eyes glowing through the dark. The fear came back. I doubted we could take on so many creatures staring us down. I didn't sense any stress from Nick, only the murderous intent from the monsters in the woods. Above us, more creatures were flying in swarms, ready to attack if any opening became available. Sweat started to drip down the side of my face. The only thing I could do was dig in my heels and shoot. A bat came swooping down from the trees, mouth open and countless teeth aiming directly at my face. I only hit it because it came right at me. It fell with a heavy thud to the ground, only to have two more take its place. Nick started his attacks as well. Each swing of his sword cut down double the number of bats that I killed. His swings rang out with a clear sound that somehow didn't ease my stress. A smaller bat I didn't notice came from the side to clamp down on my arm. I yelled in pain, trying to shake it off. The flapping wings got in my face, obscuring my vision. Nick turned to take down an oversized bat that nearly took off my head as I dealt with the smaller one. Unable to pry the bat off my arm, I ducked down to shove the creature against the ground, pinning it with the arm it was chewing on. With the wings still, I pressed my gun against its head, hoping for a weak bullet. I got lucky and killed the bat, then took a few seconds to get his remaining teeth from my arm. It bled and stung like crazy, but I was still alive. As I straightened up, the situation got worse. No matter how many bats Nick killed, 10 more took their place. The fear caused me to freeze for a second. My partner doing his best to keep his attacks up while not taking me out with friendly fire. A few seconds of fear that made me pause firing was all it took. Nick turned away for a moment. A massive bat swooped in, claws out. Both of its feet clamped into my shoulder, the sharp nails digging into the skin. With 2 beats of its wings, it lifted us both off the ground. Nick turned, his hand reached out trying to grab my leg. I felt his fingers brush against my ankle, then I was out of reach. I struggled, trying to get free. Hundreds of bats of different sizes swarmed Nick as he tried to stop my kidnapping. Turns out, I was deathly afraid of heights. The bat carried us higher, far beyond the treetops. For a brief moment, I could see Nick bursting through the swarm of bats, trying to reach me somehow. I let out a scream, thrashing, not knowing what to do. If it dropped me from this height, I would die. We flew at crazy speeds through the air, the wind freezing cold, but I would be trembling regardless. The wind was so powerful I couldn't breathe that well. I had no idea where this bat was taking me, or what the hell it was going to do. A terrible sound caused me to force my eyes open to see where it came from. A massive swarm of bats were flying around in a ball, and we were heading right for it. My mouth became so dry I couldn't even scream. Without any doubt, if I got brought into that ball, I would be eaten alive. My gun was still in my hand. Debating what to do, I looked between the ball of screeching death and to the ground. I needed to make a choice in the next few seconds. Death by bats, or by falling. Just as I tightened my grip, Nick made the choice for me. I caught a glimpse of him in the trees below. It looked as if he just threw something. I heard a small object shoot past my ear, tearing through the bat's wings and keep going into the ball of creatures. A blinding white light came from the middle as all the bats were blown away. The one carrying me screeched and I felt the claws release their grip. Nick had tossed the bullet he had kept, causing the bat trying to take me away to let go. He also took care of the others that may swoop in, stealing a falling morsel. My body flipped as I tried to stay steady while crashing back to the ground. My stomach was in my throat. I'd been on some roller coasters and rides that dropped from a certain height, but nothing compared to the feeling of free falling. The wind made it nearly impossible to keep my eyes open. I expected to hit trees, but below the ground was even further down than I thought. A cliff separated two parts of the forest. Nick was on the higher ground, running to the edge, trying to reach me before it was too late. I caught sight of him while I fell. He wasn't going to make it. I flew past, and he didn't hesitate to jump after. My body flipped so I could try to reach a hand out to his. He looked so close, and yet our fingertips were so far away. I knew there were only a few more seconds until I hit the ground. Nick did something I didn't understand. He drew his sword while in mid-fall to send a shockwave onto the ground below. I felt something hard slam into my back. Darkness overtook my vision, and I was positive I hit the ground and died. However, when I opened my eyes, I'd only been knocked out for an unknown amount of time. On my back, I stared up at the night sky with bats flying around searching for their next meal. Aside from being stiff, I didn't feel as if I'd hit the ground from dropping miles in the air. Something rested in my hand, so I curled my fingers around it. Nick had placed his fingers in my palm, and he weakly squeezed back. Starting to sit up, his voice made me stop.
Please, don't sit up yet. I'm injured and do not wish for you to see.
Nick said, and I felt my stomach flip. I should be the one dead, or nearly dead. What happened? How badly did Nick get hurt? I suppose if he hit the ground from the cliff height, he would have broken something. The fear returned as I realized if I could see the bats, they could see us. My heart nearly beating out of my chest as I watched them dip in the sky, searching. I waited for them to spot us, but they never did. Nick, what? How am I still alive? I asked the first question that came to mind while staring at the flying creatures.
I was not certain if you would have died immediately if you hit the ground. I took a risk and hit you back upwards with a shockwave from the orchestra, assuming you may live through being hit by one compared to falling. I only needed you to stay alive a few seconds to heal you.
Nick explained, sounding a bit weak. As much as I wanted to sit up and see how badly he was hurt, I respected his wishes. How did you heal me? I thought a spell like that was too much for my body. I went through everything I knew about magic, trying to see if I missed something until Nick spoke again.
I can sacrifice a part of my body in exchange for something else. I used a fingernail to ensure you didn't die. You would be asleep for at least an hour, and I was injured from the fall, so I quickly created a barrier to keep us hidden from the bats. However, that spell was too much for myself, and I suffered a great deal of blowback. We shall be protected until almost sunrise. I took some medicine before the spell to keep the pain away and to keep me awake for a while. It may run out in less than an hour, though.
I squeezed Nick's hand tighter. My partner had risked everything to save me. I started to try and think of something, anything to help him. He could absorb dead supernatural creatures to recover. If I sat safe in the circle he created and shot bats out of the sky, then he could use them to heal what damage the spell caused. Still holding onto his hand, my other reached into my holster. My heart sank when I found it empty. While I was falling, I thought I still had it in my hand. I either dropped it when the bat let go or when the shockwave hit. Without a gun, I was useless. Nick would be out cold, and the barrier would be finished before the sun rose. That left me alone and unarmed for a while with an unknown number of monsters ready to eat us. Still laying on my back, but my head started to feel light from how bleak our future looked.
Skyler, this may be a personal question, but I've been meaning to ask you something.
Nick's voice cut through my fears and worries. I couldn't fathom him ever caring about something personal, let alone during a time like this. Okay, Nikki. Shoot. After a long pause, with him looking for the right words, he spoke again. Are you dead set on fully transitioning through medical means? I felt a terrible emotional bubble in my chest, and my face got hot. I nearly crushed his hand without noticing. Because of how people treated me in the past, I've only ever heard the first part of his question. My knee-jerk reaction was to get angry. I forced it all down, and memories of my family asking if I really cared about my gender or if I just liked my hair short or wearing boyish clothing came back, or them saying how I would grow out of these feelings. You need to explain what you mean. My voice came out with a hint of venom I really didn't want it to have. Sorry, I mean if there was a different way to change your body into what it should be, would you be open to a different process? I am... Nick paused to collect himself for a second. What he was about to tell me was a very big deal, and something I already knew but shouldn't. I am a failed philosopher's stone. That is why my body can be used to power spells or sacrificed in exchange for something else. I could use a piece of my liver to change your body without the need for the surgery. I know it's sudden and an odd thing to bring up. Since it would be easy to take a part of my liver right now, I thought it would be a good time to offer. I let out a small gasp as I looked at him. His face fell into a bit of a worried look. He really didn't want me to see him in such a state. He was on his stomach, or what was left of it. He lifted himself up slightly on one arm, as the other still had a hand in my own. His legs were too far down. The suit jacket covered up the gore, but I could see how flat it was underneath. His body was separated above his waist, organs spilled free under his jacket. How he was still alive, simply a miracle. How he stayed aware and talking was beyond a miracle. Tears came to my eyes. An ache came to my chest, making me feel hollow. Nicky was in such terrible condition, and he still thought of someone else. Jesus, this isn't... Words spilled out, not making any sense. I wanted to help out, but couldn't at first. I think we can worry about getting a piece of your liver later. Right now we need to focus on keeping you alive. He gave a slight nod and looked up to the sky as if trying to come up with a plan. I realized what I suggested after the words came out and needed to correct myself. No, wait. I don't want this to happen to you again. I mean, I don't want you to be cut open and exposed. I couldn't bring myself to describe it in any other way. It's fine. I'll take a piece out from myself anytime you're ready. His honest tone made my eyes flood with tears. I shook my head, forcing them down while biting the inside of my cheek. If I started crying, I wouldn't stop. If someone told me there was going to be a person as kind as Nick out there in the world before I met him, I wouldn't believe them. It's my fault you're in this mess. If I was a stronger partner, you wouldn't have gotten so hurt time and time again. Why would you be all right cutting your stomach open for someone like me? I asked, my voice hoarse. You call me Snickerdoodle. He replied as if the answer was obvious. What? I asked, rubbing my eyes. How on earth could that be the answer? I am only important because my body holds power. Everyone sees me as an object, or is put off by my tone of voice. Abarash is kind, but even she has taken pieces to test. I'll gladly offer you a part of myself because you're the only person who wouldn't ever demand it. I've never wanted to hug a friend so badly in my life. After we got him all stitched back together, I owed him one. I owed him a lot more than a hug. No matter what, I was going to make sure we were getting out of this forest. Finally, my eyes cleared of tears. A new feeling of determination set in. The monsters above us still cried out looking for food. The fear still heavy in my chest. Hell, I was scared to death. I knew how weak I was, but I couldn't let that feeling get us killed. After we get out of here, I'll think of 100 nicknames for you. First, how long do you think you'll be awake for?
A little over 10 minutes.
That didn't give us much time. I considered trying to find my gun to kill a bat to drag over to Nick to get himself healed up. Issue being, it could have fallen anywhere. If one bat found me before I found my gun, it would be all over. I need to kill some bats for you, but I dropped my gun. I need a weapon. Can I throw the bullets like you did? Instead of answering my question out loud, he let go of my hand to reach for the orchestra next to himself. Wrapping one hand over the thin scabbard, he held it out. I can't. I mean, it's a magic sword, right? Can I even use it? I asked, looking at the sleek black scabbard and the delicate golden hilt.
The orchestra is a blade to protect, not mindlessly kill. As long as you have something precious to protect, it will let you wield its power. You also have given it nothing but respect, so you are going to have no issue holding it.
Carefully, I let him place it in both my hands. I expected it to be heavier, but the sword felt lighter than my gun. I still doubted myself. Clutching the sword tight, I thought of all the times I'd seen Nick use it. The one time it got snippy with him and refused to be used for a while was after he had cut a van in half. The rest of the time, he used it to protect something precious. His partner. I was going to do the same. I looked at his dark eyes, silently saying I was ready.
Let it sing,
he told me. I stood, looking up at the dark sky swarming with bats. I drew the sword, with a ringing sound echoing through the small clearing. I kept the scabbard in a belt loop, not wanting to dirty it by placing it on the ground. My hand shook slightly, but I could feel the sword didn't care. It knew my reason for borrowing its power and approved of it. Not knowing what else to do, I swung the sword towards the sky with all the strength in my arm. Something in my chest pulled as the shockwave came out. It crashed into a mass of bats, knocking them from the sky. I wasn't relying on just the sword's powers. Each attack took some of my own strength. I would give it everything my body had. With another swing, I aimed above us, hoping a few bats would drop nearby, but not on top of Nick. The sword in my hand quickly overtook my reason. It was similar to the eel that wanted to cut and would force the user to do so. But the orchestra was overwhelming me with frantic excitement. My arm swung again, then again, making more ringing noises that cried out with the shockwave crashes. I could do nothing as the sword completely overtook my body. Each attack added to the song it was creating. Something that shouldn't sound as beautiful as it did. The sounds of the sword mixing with the dying cries of the monsters and their bodies hitting the ground. I was unaware of how long it lasted. My entire self in a frenzy trying to keep up with the song. Everything ached. My arms felt heavy and my chest burned with every breath, and yet I still attacked. There may not even be any more creatures to kill by the time the song died down and the sword released its grip. I don't even remember placing the orchestra back into its scabbard as I passed out yet again on that job. The sword may have saved my life, but it held a terrifying power I did not want to be lost in ever again. Birds chirping woke me up. I couldn't even raise my head for a long while. Nick's suit jacket placed over my chest as a blanket, and I was against a tree. It looked to be mid-morning. Panic rose when I didn't see my partner. Soon he came out of the bushes, and weirdly enough, he wore my jacket.
Skyler, are you feeling all right?
He asked as he trotted over.
I was looking for your gun. No luck yet.
Yeah, just sore. I don't know how you can handle a sword like that. Why are you wearing my jacket? It may not be an important question, but it bothered me enough to ask. Getting down low, he looked around as if someone would be listening in.
Can you keep a secret?
He asked in a hushed tone. Okay, this was weird. Weirder than man-eating purple bats. Yes, I said cautiously. While still looking around as if he would be caught, he slowly opened up one jacket pocket while trying to keep too much sunlight from getting inside. I peered down, expecting anything. My chest tightened when I saw a pack of very small bundles of fur together. When one raised its head and yawned, I could clearly see what he had stuffed the pockets with. Nicky loaded himself up with tiny bats. As you were attacking, I blacked out for a short while. When I came to, you were exhausted and collapsed. We were surrounded by dead bats, but also these little ones. I've collected all the ones I saw. I think the person who is going to take the twins can take these as well. Of course he would be taking some sort of pet back home. But if these were somehow connected to the bats we were fighting, would that be safe? Did Nick use his power again, or were these just baby versions of the velvet bats from the destroyed farm? Shouldn't you at least hand these in to be studied or something? I offered. They'll cut them apart. I do not believe any kind of information is worth torturing the innocent for. It's why I took the twins in the first place, Nick said, closing the pocket, hiding away his new bundles of fur. With permission, right? He looked away, and his silence answered my question. I'll admit, I was on his side. I might not have been if he had a pocket full of spiders, but bats? They're cute as hell. The monstrous ones that tried to kill us all night weren't, but the rest? Every non-supernatural bat is cute, and I would fight anyone who would say otherwise. Nick helped me to my feet, both of us careful not to crush his new friends as we hobbled along. In the daylight, I could see the damage from the night before. I couldn't believe I could be the one responsible for so many trees being cut to pieces and the ground chewed up in deep grooves. As we walked along, I wondered how we would find our way back to the guard station. The answer came out of the bushes with a smile and a wave, a tall agent with black hair and sunglasses. I thought he might be the same agent who was our backup on Luna's case, but I'd seen him very briefly. Turns out that was his brother. There were a lot of agents in his family that looked alike. The agent was nice enough to help us get back to the fence and to a car that would drive us the hell out of there. He also found my gun before he found us, which was a nice surprise. The agent assumed that the magic storage in the farm exploded and was glad we didn't get caught up in the blast. Nick almost corrected him, but I gave his foot a kick to stop him. If people were after his body for power, knowing he could do this much damage would not help with that. We let the agent assume what he wanted. Nick needed to write an official report later. We were both put in the back of a car to take the bumpy road back to civilization. I still felt exhausted for the night, but wanted to talk to Nick about the offer he brought up. I feel guilty about not jumping on your offer to give up a part of your liver for me. I can't help but think about all the people who would kill for something like this and take you up on it in a heartbeat. I know at some point I'm going to, and I know what I want my body to be. But I think if it happened overnight, I wouldn't be able to deal with the sudden change, and that makes me feel like I'm an imposter. I don't have transgender friends. I don't openly talk to people about what I am. I just feel so fake. At one point, I got pretty involved in some threads reading online about how others dealt with it all, and yet my experiences never lined up with their own. I'm rambling, but the more I think about this, the more I question myself about if I have any right of being who I am, if I don't take you up on your offer the first moment we get. We drove down the road, our driver not paying any attention to us, but rather trying to avoid the bigger bumps along the way. Nick listened patiently. I didn't expect him to answer. I just didn't have anyone else to talk to about the situation, and it's not as if I could call up my sister telling her magic was real. She would try to have me locked up if I started with that. Do you think people who crossed the finish line last didn't run a marathon just because they didn't come in first? Nick offered finally. I see what you're trying to get at, but this isn't really comparable to a marathon. My old partner always said I was bad at metaphors. What I am trying to get at is everyone has their own pace and their own goals. You'll always be male. It doesn't matter if you're taking small steps to line up your body with what you're comfortable with. It does not matter what others have experienced, because they are not you. I never assumed the answer could be so simple. I'm always worrying and overthinking it all. I just really needed someone to give me an easy answer. Reaching out, I took Nick's hand, grateful I found a friend like him. He looked a bit confused, but let our hands stay the way they were. The road still bumpy, causing the car to rock. Soon, we both fell asleep, no matter how jarring the ride felt. The agent that drove us didn't know if he should wake us up when we arrived, so we let us sleep for another hour until Aberash came to pick up Nick for his report, and so she could get me back home. From what I heard, the rest of the velvet bats were found and killed, their bodies taken, and the place where the farm once stood filled in. The corporation planted new trees to replace the ones our fight knocked over. The loss of the farm set an example to the others not to become cheap with their laborers, and for the corporation to add in-person agent check-ins to ensure the farms were not creating powerful feral bats for extra profit. The moment I got back home, I kicked off my shoes, ready for a shower. I was going through and ruining clothing on these jobs with Nick at an alarming pace. Pausing, I looked at my reflection in the bathroom mirror before it fogged up from the steam. I could change my appearance at any time. It would only cost a friend to cut himself open to take out a small piece in exchange. There were a lot of things I didn't like about my reflection, but I liked the idea of using Nick the same way everyone else wanted, even less. I could keep going at my own pace. Maybe someday I might take him up on what he was offering, but for now, I was fine disliking a few things until I got ready to change them. Thank you for listening. You can handle another horror story, right? Try shooting these bats as practice. I'll ensure they don't get close. Geez, Nikki, are we really having a tutorial level? Putting one hand over the thin scabbard. Scabbard, very nice. I drew the sword with a ringing sound echoing through the small clearing. I kept the scabbard in the belt. Okay, now you're showing off. You're just saying scabbard every time.